If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I first started at the firm with my portfolio clutched in sweaty hands, that my life would be irrevocably altered by Julian Cole, I would have laughed, or maybe just stared blankly. Back then, Julian was a name whispered in the hallways, a force of nature somewhere on the executive floor. He was a myth. Now, he was just the man who made my perfectly ordered world feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. My life was a study in controlled environments. My apartment was a testament to minimalism, all clean lines and muted colors, a sanctuary from the visual noise of the city. My desk at work was the same. Pens aligned, papers stacked at perfect right angles, computer monitor free of smudges. I designed buildings, structures meant to impose order on chaos. It was what I did. It was who I was, a man of quiet routines and carefully managed expectations. Solitude was my default state. Not a sad, lonely solitude, but a comfortable, worn-in one, like an old armchair. It was predictable. It was safe. People were messy, unpredictable variables I couldn't factor into my neat equations. So I kept them at a polite distance, observing from behind the glass of my own meticulously constructed life. And I observed Julian Cole. He wasn't a myth anymore. He was the senior project manager, the one who strode into meetings 10 minutes late and still managed to command the entire room with a single sharp gesture. He was tall, built with the kind of broad-shouldered confidence that seemed to take up more than his fair share of oxygen. His suits were always impeccably tailored, but he wore them like he'd rather be in jeans, a tension between the corporate shell and the man inside. He was, from my distant vantage point, everything I was not. Loud where I was quiet, decisive where I was hesitant, a sun burning hot and bright, while I was a satellite caught in its orbit, content to just watch the light. He had a voice that could cut through the drone of a conference call, a low baritone that vibrated in my chest and made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. My crush on him was a silent, architectural thing, a hidden flaw in my own foundation. I'd built walls around it, soundproofed it, pretended it wasn't there. But it was a persistent, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my orderly days. It was a foolish, pointless ache for a man who barely knew my name. A man who, by all accounts, moved through a world of elegant women and weekend sailing trips, a world that had no room for a quiet architect who preferred blueprints to people. Our interactions were brutally efficient. He would point at a section of my designs on the large screen. "This corner," he'd say, his voice clipping the words. "It's weak. Fix it." He never said please. He never said thank you. He just stated facts, identified problems, and moved on. To him, I was just a pair of hands, a functionary who translated his vision into viable plans. He wasn't cruel. He was just distant as a star you can see but never, ever touch. The barrier between us was more than just professional hierarchy. It was a difference in species. He was the predator. I was the thing that learned to stay very, very still in the tall grass. My heart would hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird whenever he stopped by my desk, his large frame eclipsing the fluorescent lights above. I would feel a hot flush creep up my neck, my own body betraying me with its ridiculous schoolboy response. He would lean over my shoulder to look at my monitor, and the scent of him, something clean and sharp like cedar and cold air, would fill my carefully controlled space. It was an invasion, a welcome, terrifying invasion. He'd tap a finger on the screen, his nail making a small, decisive click, and then he'd be gone, leaving the air crackling in his wake. And I would sit there for a full minute, unable to breathe properly. This was our status quo, a silent, one-sided obsession on my part and complete professional indifference on his. A perfectly stable, if painful, equilibrium. Then came the Sterling Tower project. It was the biggest project of my career, a twisting skyscraper of glass and steel that was set to redefine the city's skyline. And it was Julian's baby. He was the lead, the driving force, the man whose reputation was on the line. And I was his lead architect. For 6 months, our orbits were forced to intersect, the distance between us collapsing from light years to mere feet. The disruption came in the form of an email. Subject: urgent, client presentation, Chicago. We had to fly out, both of us, to present the final schematics to the investors. It was a sudden, last-minute command performance. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. A flight, a hotel, a whole day of forced proximity with Julian Cole. It felt less like a business trip and more like a sentence. At the airport, the chaos was already a living thing. The departures board was a flickering nightmare of red cancellations. A storm was rolling in, a massive front that was shutting down the entire eastern seaboard. Julian stood beside me, a pillar of calm in the swirling sea of panicked travelers. He was on his phone, his voice low and firm, trying to bend the weather to his will. I, on the other hand, was vibrating with a low-level hum of anxiety. I hated flying. I hated crowds. And I was acutely, painfully aware of Julian's shoulder just inches from my own. I could feel the heat radiating from him. I focused on a point on the far wall, try to regulate my breathing, try to pretend I was anywhere else. "Everything's grounded," he finally said, snapping his phone shut. He looked at me, his gray eyes assessing, as if I were a structural problem he needed to solve. "Nothing's getting out until morning." If we're lucky, the announcement came a moment later, a disembodied voice confirming our fate. Our flight was canceled. The bees in my stomach went into a frenzy. "Right," Julian said, all business. "We need a hotel." He was already pulling up an app, his thumbs moving with practiced efficiency. I just stood there, useless, a piece of luggage he had to deal with. He swore under his breath. "Everything's booked. The whole city is stranded." He kept scrolling, his jaw tight with frustration. Then he stopped. "Okay, there's one room left." At the airport gateway, he looked at me again, and for the first time, I saw something other than command in his eyes. A flicker of apology, resignation. One room, two beds. My heart didn't just flutter. It stopped. It completely ceased to function for a solid 2 seconds before slamming back into action with the force of a battering ram. One room. I can sleep in the terminal. I heard myself say the words thin and reedy. It's fine and noble, pathetic offer. Julian actually scoffed. A small, sharp sound of disbelief. "Don't be an idiot, Leo. We have a multi-million-dollar presentation tomorrow. We need to sleep." He didn't wait for my agreement. He just booked it, the confirmation screen glowing in the dim terminal light. He turned and started walking toward the hotel shuttle bus stop. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. And like a fool, I followed. The hotel room was aggressively beige. 2 queen beds, a small desk, generic print of a sailboat on the wall. It was sterile and impersonal, but the moment the door clicked shut behind us, the air became thick, charged with a strange, suffocating intimacy. The space, which would have felt cavernous if I were alone, suddenly seemed impossibly small, shrunk by the sheer presence of Julian Cole. He dropped his briefcase by the door and immediately loosened his tie, pulling it from his collar with a single, fluid motion. He unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt, revealing the strong column of his throat. I quickly looked away, my gaze landing on the offensive sailboat. I felt like an intruder in my own skin. "I'll take the one by the window," he said. It wasn't a question. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I placed my own bag carefully by the other bed, my movements stiff and unnatural. For the first time, in the quiet of that beige room, I could really look at him. Not steal glances across a boardroom table, but actually observe. The harsh fluorescent lights of the office were replaced by the soft glow of a bedside lamp, and it softened him. I saw the fine lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. I saw the way his shoulders, free from the structure of his suit jacket, which he'd now slung over a chair, slumped just a little. He looked tired, human. He ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it slightly disheveled. I noticed a small, pale scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail I'd never seen before. It was a tiny imperfection in his otherwise flawless facade, and it was utterly captivating. My fingers itched with the insane, unthinkable urge to trace it. He caught me staring. My eyes snapped back to the sailboat. Heat flooded my face. So much for being a cool, detached observer. "What?" he asked, his voice rough with weariness. "Nothing," I said too quickly. "Just long day." He grunted in agreement and walked over to the minibar, pulling out 2 bottles of water. He tossed one to me. Our hands brushed as I fumbled to catch it. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure electricity shot up my arm, short-circuiting my entire nervous system. The plastic bottle felt searing hot in my hand. I could feel the phantom touch of his fingers, the slight roughness of a callus on his thumb, long after he'd pulled away. My breath hitched. I turned away, pretending to be intensely interested in the contents of my overnight bag, hoping he hadn't noticed my ridiculous, over-the-top reaction. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Get a grip, Leo. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It was the first time we had ever touched, and my body had responded like a parched desert to a drop of rain. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint rumble of a plane that wasn't taking off. I could hear the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. The client portal is a nightmare, Julian said suddenly, breaking the tension. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, his laptop open. He was frowning at the screen. I can't get the revised deck to upload. Here was something I could do. Something practical. A problem I could solve. Sometimes the VPN conflicts with hotel Wi-Fi, I said, stepping forward. You have to clear the cache and re-authenticate. He looked up at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He, the great Julian Cole, was stumped by a simple IT issue. Show me. I moved to his side, careful to keep a respectable distance, and leaned over to look at his screen. The scent of him, cedar and cold air, filled my senses again, but this time it was closer, more potent. I tried to focus on the pixels, on the familiar interface, on anything but the warmth of his shoulder, so close to mine. My hand was shaking slightly as I pointed to the settings menu. You go here, I explained, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. And then here, I walked him through the steps. He listened, his focus absolute. For those few minutes, the dynamic between us shifted. I was the one with the knowledge, the one in control. The intimidating project manager was gone, replaced by a man who was just frustrated with his computer. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. The power imbalance that had defined our relationship for years leveled out, just for a moment, in the quiet hum of that beige hotel room. There, I said, as the upload progress bar finally appeared and started to fill. It's working, huh, he said, looking from the screen to me. Thanks, he actually said it. Thanks. And he smiled. Not a corporate, polite smile, but a small, genuine one that reached his tired eyes. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. My stomach did a slow, dizzying flip. I retreated to the safety of my own bed, my job done. But something had broken. A crack had appeared in the wall between us. He had shown a sliver of vulnerability, and I had been there to help. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was just Julian. The room grew dark outside, the storm finally breaking, rain lashing against the window pane. We didn't talk about work anymore. The silence that returned was different, less fraught with tension, more comfortable. We both just sat on our respective beds, lost in our own thoughts, the sound of the rain a soothing white noise. Do you ever get tired of it? He asked, his voice low, almost blending with the storm. I looked over at him. He was staring out the window, his profile silhouetted against the city's distant glow. Tired of what? This, he said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at his laptop, at the invisible weight of the project that had brought us here. The pressure, the constant expectation to be on, to have all the answers. It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. A confession whispered into the dark of a stranger's room. My carefully constructed image of Julian Cole, the unflappable commander, shattered into a million pieces. Beneath the armor, there was just a man, a tired man. All the time, I admitted, my own voice barely a whisper. I feel like I'm just pretending, waiting for someone to realize I have no idea what I'm doing. He turned his head to look at me, his eyes dark pools in the dim light. You're not pretending, Leo. You're the best damn architect we have. Your work, it's like you build silence. It's clean. It's honest. My breath caught in my throat. He saw me. He actually saw my work, understood it. He didn't just see a functionary, a pair of hands. He saw the intent behind the lines. The compliment landed in the center of my chest like a warm, heavy stone. Thank you, I managed to say. I'm not good with people, he confessed, turning back to the window. I'm good with logistics, with problems. But people, they're messy. I say the wrong thing. I'm too blunt. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. I know what they call me at the office. The Tin Man, my heart ached for him, for the loneliness in that admission. They're wrong, I said, with a certainty that surprised me. You're not. He was quiet for a long time. The only sounds were the rain and our breathing, two distinct rhythms slowly starting to synchronize in the small space. Why are you so quiet all the time? He asked, his gaze still fixed on the rain-streaked glass. The question was so direct, so personal, it felt like a physical touch. I don't know, I lied. Then, I decided to tell the truth. It's just safer. If you don't say anything, you can't say the wrong thing. Safer isn't always better, he murmured. He stood up and walked to the window, standing with his back to me. He placed a hand against the cool glass, his broad shoulders blocking the fragmented view of the city lights. He looked impossibly lonely. I think I've been choosing safer my whole life, he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it. Building a life that looked right from the outside. The right job, the right neighborhood, the right fiancé. The word landed like a punch to the gut. Fiancé, of course. A sharp, cold pain spread through my chest. The foolish, hopeful little flame that had ignited inside me was instantly extinguished. I felt like an idiot. He was just tired, just being confessional because we were in this strange, liminal space. It meant nothing. We broke up 3 months ago, he added, as if he'd heard my thoughts. She said I was emotionally unavailable. A robot in a good suit. He turned around to face me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, unguarded pain. She wasn't wrong. The space between our beds felt like a chasm, an ocean of unspoken things. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Don't be, he said, taking a step toward the center of the room, and then another. He stopped in the small space between our beds. He was so close now. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. The truth is, I was relieved. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally let it out. He looked down at me, his gaze intense, searching. But then there was just silence. Emptiness. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. The air was thick, electric. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This was it. The precipice. And then there's you, he whispered, the words hanging in the air between us. You're so quiet, but I can't stop watching you. In meetings, at your desk, the way you focus. It's like the rest of the world just disappears for you. This couldn't be happening. My mind was screaming, a red alert siren blaring through my thoughts. This was Julian Cole, my boss, the man I had silently adored from a safe distance for years. And he was saying, what was he saying? I don't understand. I breathed. Neither do I, he said, his voice raw with confusion. He took the final step, and then he was sitting on the edge of my bed, his knee brushing against mine. The contact was a brand, searing through the thin fabric of my trousers. The world narrowed to that single point of touch. I just know that being here with you in this stupid beige room. It's the first time I haven't felt empty in months. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently brushed against my cheek. His touch was feather-light, questioning. His calloused fingertips were a startling contrast to the softness of the gesture. I leaned into his hand, an involuntary movement, a desperate, silent plea. His thumb stroked my cheekbone, and his eyes searched mine, looking for permission? An answer? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore, except the warmth of his hand on my skin and the frantic, terrifying hope blooming in my chest. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, mesmerized by the vulnerability in his gaze. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was soft, tentative, a question. His lips were warm and dry, and they moved against mine with a hesitant curiosity. It was the most honest kiss I had ever experienced. It was a confession without words, an admission of a confusion and a longing that mirrored my own. I lifted a trembling hand and placed it on his chest, over his heart. I could feel it beating, a steady, powerful rhythm beneath my palm. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft sigh escaping his lips, and I opened to him, a silent surrender. The taste of him was faint, like bottled water, and something uniquely, indefinably Julian. The world outside, the storm, the project, the entire firm, it all dissolved. There was only the quiet room, the sound of the rain, and the astonishing, impossible reality of Julian's lips on mine. It was slow and careful, and it felt more real than anything I had ever known. When he finally pulled back, it was only by an inch. Our foreheads rested together, our breath mingling in the small space between us. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And hearing him say my name like that, so softly, so full of wonder, was almost more intimate than the kiss itself. It undid me completely. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just closed my eyes, tried to commit every single sensation to memory. The weight of his hand still on my face, the thrum of his heart under my palm, the lingering warmth on my lips. I was terrified that if I opened my eyes, he would be gone, and this would all have been a dream conjured by a tired, hopeful mind. But he was still there. He was real. The morning light was a pale, gray wash against the window when I woke up. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to catch up with the events of the night. Then it all came rushing back, the rain, the confession, the kiss. A slow, warm feeling spread through my chest. I turned my head. Julian's bed was empty, neatly made. His briefcase was gone. His jacket was gone. The warmth in my chest turned to ice. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I sat bolt upright, my heart starting to pound with a sick, familiar rhythm. He was gone. There was a piece of hotel stationery on the bedside table. My hand trembled as I reached for it. For words were scrawled in Julian's sharp, angular handwriting. Had to catch a cab. No. Good morning. No. See you at the presentation. No mention of what had happened between us. Just a cold, functional statement. It was a dismissal, a retraction. It was him, slamming the door shut on the intimacy we had shared. The air in the room felt thin, used up. I couldn't breathe. My mind, my greatest enemy, started to spin a narrative of humiliation and regret. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness on his part, fueled by exhaustion and emotional turmoil over his ex-fiancée. He was confused, lonely, and I was just there, convenient. An anomaly he was now desperate to correct. The man who had kissed me with such hesitant tenderness was gone, and the senior project manager was back. The walls were back up, higher and thicker than before, and I had been foolish enough to believe they might come down. I sank back against the pillows, the note clutched in my hand, the paper crinkling with the force of my grip. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I felt naive, stupid. I had broken my own cardinal rule. I had let someone in, and the morning after wreckage was exactly what I had always feared it would be. Solitude, silence, the crushing weight of my own foolish heart. The flight back was a special kind of torture. By some cruel twist of fate, we ended up on the same rebooked flight. He was in business class, I was in economy. We didn't speak. We didn't even make eye contact as we boarded. The presentation itself had been a blur of professional courtesy. We were a team. We were colleagues. We were strangers who had shared a secret that was now a toxic, unspoken thing between us. He was flawless, of course. Confident, charming, commanding. The Tin Man was back on his pedestal. Back at the office, the silence became a weapon. It was a living entity that occupied the space between our desks. He didn't stop by my workstation anymore. Emails became curt, stripped of any pleasantries. In meetings, his gaze would slide right over me, as if I were a ghost in the chair. The casual camaraderie of the rest of the team felt like a mockery, their easy laughter and lunchtime chatter a world away from the silent, screaming void I was trapped in. My old solitude, once a comfortable refuge, was now haunted. It was no longer a peaceful state of being, it was an absence. The quiet of my apartment at night wasn't calming anymore. It was just empty. Every corner of my life was now defined by the lack of him. I would sit at my pristine desk and remember the feeling of his hand on my cheek, and the memory was a fresh wound every single time. Days turned into a week of agonizing, drawn-out silence. I was drowning. I replayed that night in the hotel room over and over, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for the moment I had misread everything so catastrophically. Had I imagined the vulnerability in his eyes, the honesty in his kiss? Or worse, had it been real, and he simply regretted it that much? The thought that I was a source of regret and shame for him was a constant, dull ache behind my ribs. I had ruined everything. Our professional relationship was a wreck, and my own foolish heart was collateral damage. I wanted to retreat, to build my walls even higher, to never risk anything again. But it was too late. He had already breached the perimeter. He had shown me what connection could feel like, and now I knew, with painful clarity, exactly what I was missing. The week bled into a second. I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping. My work, my usually meticulous, precise work, was suffering. I made a stupid error on a floor plan, a miscalculation that could have had serious consequences. It was caught, thankfully, but the shame of it was another heavy stone on my chest. I was unraveling. It was a Thursday night. I was working late, trying to fix my mistake, the office cavernously empty and silent around me. I was exhausted, hollowed out by anxiety and lack of sleep. I was ready to give up, to just go home and crawl into bed and not emerge for a week. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the hallway toward my cubicle. My heart seized. I knew who it was without even looking up. I kept my eyes glued to my monitor, my whole body tensing, bracing for impact. He stopped just outside my cubicle wall. He didn't say anything for a long time. I could feel his presence, a weight in the air. The silence stretched, a taut wire of tension. I wanted to scream at him. Say something. Just say anything. Yell at me. Fire me. Just break this horrible, crushing silence. Leo, his voice, low and rough. It sliced through the quiet, and a tremor went through me. I didn't look up. I couldn't. He stepped into my cubicle, my meticulously ordered space. He was invading again. He walked around to the side of my desk and stood there, looking down at me. Finally, I forced myself to lift my head. He looked terrible, as bad as I felt. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his jaw tight with a tension that seemed to go bone deep. His perfect suit was rumpled, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who had been fighting a war and losing. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was quiet, but it held an undeniable weight. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice coming out cold and brittle. A pathetic attempt at self-preservation. "If this is about the floor plan, I've fixed it. This isn't about the floor plan," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You know it's not." I looked away, back at the meaningless lines on my screen. "I'm busy, Julian. I've been a coward." The words were so unexpected, so raw, that my head snapped back up to look at him. "What I did," he continued, his voice tight with self-loathing, "leaving like that, sending that pathetic note, ignoring you for 2 weeks. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done." He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure exhaustion. I panicked, Leo. I completely and utterly panicked. I just stared at him, my heart a wild, frantic thing in my chest. I didn't know what to say. "Everything that happened in that room," he said, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "It was real. It was more real than anything I've felt in, maybe ever. And it terrified me. It didn't fit into the life I thought I had, the person I thought I was. So you ran," I said, the bitterness I'd been swallowing for 2 weeks finally bubbling to the surface. "Yes," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I ran. And it was a mistake. These last 2 weeks, they've been hell. This silence, it's been killing me." He took a hesitant step closer. "Walking into this office every day and not being able to talk to you, not being able to even look at you, because I'm so ashamed of how I acted. I can't do it anymore. My own anger, my own hurt began to dissolve, replaced by the overwhelming sight of his pain. The great Julian Cole, the Tin Man, was standing in my cubicle, breaking apart before my eyes. He was just as scared as I was. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, the words thick with unshed tears. "I thought I was a mistake." "No," he said, his voice fierce. "God, no, Leo. You were not the mistake. My fear was the mistake. Leaving you was the mistake." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us, just as it had in the hotel room. He was asking for permission again. Slowly, my own fear receding, I nodded. "Just once." His hand closed around mine, his fingers lacing with my own. His grip was firm, desperate. It wasn't a fleeting, accidental touch this time. It was an anchor. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry I hurt you." A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. He reached up with his free hand and gently wiped it away with his thumb. "This is new for me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This territory, it's frightening. I don't know the rules. I don't think there are any rules," I whispered back, my own hand tightening around his. "Good," he said, a ghost of his real smile returning. "Because I'm tired of playing by them." He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. Can we start over? Not from the beginning. From that room. Can we go back to that room?" All the pain and anxiety of the last 2 weeks melted away, leaving only a profound, heart-stopping relief. He wasn't running anymore. He was here. He was choosing this. He was choosing me. "Okay," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "Okay, Julian." He didn't let go of my hand. He held it like he was afraid I might disappear. He just stood there for a long moment, breathing, as if the simple act of holding my hand was enough to calm the storm inside him. Then he looked around my sterile, perfect cubicle. "Let's get out of here," he said. He led me out of the empty office building, his hand still holding mine. The simple, public act of it felt revolutionary. We walked into the cool night air, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. We didn't go to my apartment or his. We just walked for hours through the quiet city streets, our hands linked between us. We talked about everything and nothing. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface for both of us, but it was overshadowed by a fragile, burgeoning hope. A few days later, he walked up to my desk in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The whole office was humming with its usual productive buzz. My heart did its customary lurch, but it was a hopeful flutter now, not a panicked one. He didn't say anything. He just placed a single, solitary key on my desk next to my perfectly aligned pens. It was heavy and solid, and unmistakably the key to an apartment. His apartment. He met my wide-eyed gaze. He gave me a small, private smile that was meant only for me, and then he walked away. It was a promise, a tangible act of commitment that shouted louder than any public declaration could. It was him, handing me the trust he was so afraid to give. It was him, telling me the door was open. The new beginning wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was a series of small, quiet revolutions. It was waking up in his bed, the sheets messy and tangled with mine, and finding him already awake, just watching me with a soft look in his eyes that made my chest ache with a feeling too big for my body. The morning after anxiety, that familiar ghost, was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. It was him in my kitchen, in my minimalist sanctuary, making coffee. He was clumsy in the unfamiliar space, opening the wrong cupboards, making too much noise. He was a disruption, a beautiful, wonderful disruption to my quiet order. He left his coffee mug on the counter, creating a ring on the pristine white surface, and I found I didn't care. The mess was a sign of life, a sign of him. It was sharing meals, not in fancy restaurants, but sitting on the floor of his apartment, eating takeout from cardboard boxes, surrounded by half-unpacked, moving crates from his old life. We would talk for hours, filling in the silent years we had spent as strangers in the same building. I learned about his childhood on a farm, his difficult relationship with his father, his secret love for old black and white movies. He learned about my quiet passion for botany, my fear of public speaking, the way I saw the world in lines and structures. The Tin Man was gone. In his place was Julian, a man of surprising depth and a quiet, steadfast tenderness. Sleeping in the same bed became our normal. There was a profound comfort in the simple act of it. The weight of his arm draped over my waist, the sound of his slow, deep breathing in the dark. It was the antidote to a lifetime of solitude. I had spent so many years building walls to keep the world out, and he hadn't just knocked them down. He had walked through the rubble, taken my hand, and helped me build a home instead. My life used to be a straight line, a carefully plotted trajectory from one predictable point to the next. Julian was a plot twist I never saw coming. He was the chaotic variable that shattered all my equations. He had forced his way into my controlled environment and completely upended it, not with force, but with a vulnerability that mirrored my own. He taught me that strength isn't about being unflappable or having all the answers. It's about being brave enough to admit you're scared. It's about being willing to dismantle the life you thought you were supposed to have for the one that actually makes you feel alive. He thought my work was about building silence, but what he didn't realize was that I was just building a place to hide. I wasn't hiding anymore. Standing here now, in the warm light of our living room, watching him on the sofa, asleep with a book fallen on his chest, I feel a sense of peace that I never knew was possible. My heart, once a frantic trapped bird, is calm. The house of cards I thought he would destroy has been rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before, because now it has a foundation of two. He was the storm, yes, but he was also the quiet that came after. He was the man who missed his flight, and in doing so, made sure I finally landed.